Muy buenos días a todos. Gracias por acompañarnos. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning in Mexico. It's afternoon for those listening from the other side of the pond in Europe. And as a senior fellow here at COMEXI, it's a real honor and a pleasure to moderate this session and to introduce to all of you our esteemed speaker this afternoon. He's Professor Michael Bank Petersen, a professor of political science at the University of Aarhus in Denmark, whose focus of research is the state and the challenges democracy faces in the 21st century, particularly when it comes to hostility, distrust, and crisis politics. Professor Petersen's work lies within the field of political psychology. He uses theories and methods from cognitive and evolutionary psychology to illuminate problems in political science. Looking into the darker aspects of political behavior, such as political polarization, opposition towards a political system, spread of misinformation, the psychology of online hostility, and political violence. Professor Petersen has published around 100 peer-reviewed articles in very relevant international journals within the fields of political science and psychology. In addition, he's published 2 books and multiple book chapters. He's the recipient of the Erik Erikson Award by the International Society for Political Psychology and a member of the Royal Danish Academy of Sciences and Letters. In 2022, Professor Petersen was named Knight of the Order of Dannebrog by the Queen of Denmark for his contributions to science and during the pandemic. It's a great honor, again, to welcome Dr. Petersen to COMEXI. And without further ado, and given the very interesting topic that brings us together today, I'll pass on the microphone to Professor Petersen so that he can address us. Thank you, everybody, and here's to you, Professor Petersen.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction and for the invitation to come and speak about this topic, which I've been doing research on for the past few years. So what I'll do now is that I'll share a presentation and some slides where I will try to discuss what we have been sort of discovering when researching the darker sides of anti-establishment attitudes. And I would say that I will be focusing a lot on United States because this is where we have been doing our research. But I hope that in the Q&A we can connect it potentially also to the political realities in Mexico and elsewhere. But I will start by sharing my screen. And I hope you can all see the presentation now. So the title of this presentation is Burn It All: How Marginalization, Privilege, and Status Seeking Make for Combustible Politics. And the place where we started to understand this drive in some aspects of modern electorates to burn it all down was with a phenomenon that got a lot of international focus in during the 2016 US presidential elections. Here we began focusing a lot on misinformation, fake news, or what we in general call hostile political rumors. That is negative information about political opponents, political groups, with a low evidential basis. These are things such as the Pizzagate conspiracy. It was rumors about Barack Obama being born in Kenya. We also saw other kinds of rumors relating to the Medicare system in the United States. And of course, these things also go back to 9/11. There has been connections to Russia and so on. So this is essentially the phenomenon that we started trying to understand. Why is it that people are motivated to share misinformation, conspiracy theories, fake news online? And what I'll try to accomplish in this presentation is, first of all, to give an account focused on the psychology of rumor sharing. Why is it that people do this? But what is also clear, I hope will be clear, is that in the process of trying to understand this phenomenon of misinformation, we also stumbled upon the existence of a largely overlooked strategy for gaining status that essentially is focused on destruction. How some people in today's society are actively seeking destruction in order to gain status. And this, we believe, and this is the final thing I'll try to do in this talk, is that this is actually one of the key challenges facing modern democracy. And I just want to start out by saying that this is not a positive, optimistic talk. It is a talk about really some of the darker sides of human nature and some of the really deep problems that we're facing in democracies across the world. So if we start out by saying, well, what are the traditional accounts for why people share misinformation online? Then one answer had been given by cognitive scientists and psychologists such as Gordon Pennycook and David Rand in the United States, where they say, well, the problem is that people are not paying enough attention to what is true and what is not true. Essentially, they want to share the truth, but sometimes they forget to do it. So people are sometimes cognitively lazy. They don't invest enough in figuring out what is true and false, and therefore sometimes they happen to share misinformation on social media. So if that account is true, then what we need to do is that we need to invest in fact checking. We need to invest in educations that focus on digital literacy, because essentially, if people just learn what is true and what is not true, then they will refrain from sharing the falsehoods, the misinformation, the conspiracy theories. So this is one account that is in the scientific literature. Another account is this account by Buggles et al. that essentially says that, well, trolls just want to have fun. There are people online who just do stuff for the lulz, as it's sometimes being termed. Essentially, they don't mean anything by it. They just want to sort of create something with a shock value or shock effect, and it shouldn't be taken too seriously. And essentially, the solution in that case is to ignore the trolls and just keep on with your business. So the key thing here is that the psychological theories that we have about why it is that people share misinformation and hostile political rumors on the internet, they have consequences. They have consequences in the form that they determine the societal solutions. Again, if the problem is that people want to share the truth but don't know what is true and false, then the solution lies in fact-checking. But of course, if that's not the case, then we need other forms of solutions to the problem of misinformation. And here, one major concern that I have is, well, what if the present theories are wrong? What if there's essentially something else going on? And I think that there are some reason to believe that there's something else going on if we look at the broader theories and the broader evidence that we have about how it is that people behave in conflict settings. So one of the really influential books for me has been this book by Donald Horowitz, which is called The Deadly Ethnic Riot. And this book, it's not just an influential book, it's also one of the most disturbing books I think I've ever read, because essentially what it does is that it details what happens before, during, and after ethnic massacres across the world. And one of the things that Donald Horowitz looks a lot at is rumor sharing. Essentially, he's saying that you don't see an ethnic massacre unfold without a preceding period of rumor sharing. And in one important paragraph, he describes it in this way. He says, concealed threats and outrages committed in secret figure prominently in pre-riot rumors. Rumors are embedded in the riot situation because they're satisfying and useful to rioters and their leaders. Rumor is likely to prevail over accurate information. Rumor prevails because it orders and organizes action and process. So essentially what Horowitz is saying is that if you have an intense societal conflict, then sometimes misinformation and conspiracy theories, they will actually win because it's more useful to spread misinformation than it is to spread accurate information. And the reason is that misinformation can be used to organize action in process, essentially to mobilize people for the cause that you want. So in this perspective, rumor sharing is actually a strategic and deliberate form of behavior. Why can that be the case? So if we look a bit deeper at the psychology of group conflict, then it's very important to say that essentially group conflict among humans is essentially one of the most collaborative endeavors that we can engage in. Because when it comes to human conflict, then it's often the most well-coordinated, the most cooperative group that wins. So for humans, within group collaboration is a key determinant of our abilities to win in a conflict. So in that case, when you have two human groups that are fighting, then it's essentially an arms race of coordination that each group tries to become better coordinated, more collaborative than the other group that they are locked into a fight with. And this means that from a evolutionary perspective, then we should expect that in the human mind, we have specialized mechanisms for solving this coordination problem, which can include rumor sharing, that essentially by portraying the enemy as evil, then we can facilitate the needed collaboration and the needed mobilization for our cause. In this regard, it's also very important to say that the kinds of hostile political rumors that we see in modern politics actually share a number of key characteristics with the kinds of rumors that we see in ethnic riots. So they often sort of highlight the outgroup's power. They highlight how the outgroup really has a low valuation of the in-group, and they often highlight that the outgroup, whether it's a political party or a political elite, that they are ready to aggress. So this kind of research that I'm describing here started from the basic prediction that a lot of what we see in modern politics with regards to the sharing of misinformation is really motivated by attempts to mobilize people against the target group of those rumors. So when Republicans share misinformation about Democrats in the United States, they're really trying to mobilize like-minded individuals against the Democrats. So The question, though, is what is it that people are really trying to mobilize against? Like, who is it that they're trying to mobilize? And especially in the US context, there has been a lot of focus on political polarization, that, well, the Democrat activists are likely trying to mobilize against Republicans, and Republican activists are trying to mobilize against Democrats. And it's true that there is a lot of political polarization in the United States, but there's also other kinds of cleavages going on. So it's not just that we have some people sympathizing with the Democrats and some people sympathizing with the Republicans. There also seem, especially if we look across a number of different countries in the world, there also seems to be an emerging cleavage focusing on opposition against the entire political system. So we have seen protests against the political system erupt in a number of countries. This escalated during the corona pandemic with protests against vaccines, against restrictions, and so on. But this also has a longer history than just during the pandemic, because what we see in a very large number of countries is that they are growing apart, that inequality is on the rise across a large number of democracies, where the richer becomes way more rich than the bottom of society. So on this basis, our core claim that we've been trying to test is, well, maybe the sharing of hostile political rumors and the misinformation that we're seeing is not just sort of one political group trying to mobilize against another sort of mainstream political group. Potentially, the sharing of hostile political rumors reflects what we call chaotic motivations. That is, that they are trying to target the entire political cosmos, the entire political system, rather than just trying to help one mainstream actor against the other mainstream actor. And in order to sort of give you a sense of the kinds of sentiments that we're trying to understand here, then we can look at to Hollywood, who have been portraying these kinds of chaotic sentiments in a number of movies. And one movie is the movie Fight Club, which you may have seen. So in the movie Fight Club, the actor Brad Pitt is in fact trying to speak out against the entire way in which society is structured. And he does that in, for example, this way, where he says, we've all been raised on television to believe that one day we'd all be millionaires and movie gods and rock stars, but we won't. And we're slowly learning that fact, and we are very, very pissed off. So this kind of burn it all down mindset, we are arguing, is essentially a form of status seeking. So we know that humans engage in what we call dominance in order to try to acquire status. Dominance refers to the induction of fear through intimidation and coercion, whereby you then attain social rank. And what we're arguing is that essentially this kind of signal that you want to burn it all does serve as a dominant signal. So essentially, by saying we will tear it all apart, you engage in a costly signal that you are motivated to induce costs, which can be taken as a form of dominance and can induce fear. But also at the same time, while you're signaling by this kind of burn it all strategy that you are a dominant individual, you can also, through the sharing of misinformation, coordinate with and mobilize other like-minded individuals that can help you accomplish your goals. And finally, one of the functions of this is that if you are a dominant individual, it may actually be beneficial to live in a more chaotic, more conflict-ridden world, because in such a world, that's where it really pays to be a person inducing fears in others. So there's really higher social returns to such an individual in a conflict-ridden society. So there are some existing evidence that there is this link between destructive drives and a search for dominance. So we know that conspiratorial thinking is connected to a lack of trust and feelings of alienation. We know that people who are motivated to attain dominance, they engage more in interpersonal violence, and we have shown that it also motivate people to engage in violence in politics. We know from a lot of psychological research that people who are uncertain about their status, that they are more likely to identify with radicalized groups, and that they are more likely to derogate outgroups. And we also know from anthropological research that there's this phenomenon of running amok, essentially engaging in killing sprees, like what we are seeing sometimes in school shootings. And at the heart of that is a desire for recognition. So what we've been trying to do is to try to develop a psychological scale that essentially allow us to measure this destructive drive of what we call a need for chaos. And it consists of people's agreement with 7 rather extreme sentiments, such as, when I think about our political and social institutions, I cannot help thinking, just let them all burn. Or we cannot fix the problems in our social institutions, we need to tear them down and start over. So what we do in our research is that we ask people these questions in surveys, and then we aggregate the answers to this level of need for chaos for the individual. And while they are very extreme, the statements, then people do have an easy time answering the questions. Luckily, most of them disagree with them, but there is a substantial minority who does not outright reject them. And there are even a few percentage who fully agrees with these kinds of statements. And we have been using this scale in a large number of studies in United States. One of the first things that we have been looking at is, well, are people who have this need for chaos, are they in fact willing to engage in disruptive behavior? And here we used radicalization research, which differentiates between what they call legal activism, for example, being willing to travel 1 hour to participate in a demonstration. And then they also look at so-called violent activism, that they, for example, encourage others to participate in violent protests. And what we can see in the 2 studies that we have done here is that there is a very high correlation between being high in need for chaos and being willing to engage in violent activism. The correlation is not that high with legal activism. So these are not individuals who necessarily engage to a much higher degree in legal forms of activism, but it's this particular group who are willing to engage in violent activism. So in order to understand whether this is also what lies behind sharing of conspiracy theories, in a number of studies there, we presented our participants with headlines that contained hostile rumors or conspiracy theories that target the Democrats or the Republicans. And you here can see some of the examples that we used, such as whether Obama was born in Kenya or whether Republicans paid people to vote illegally in the United States. And after we presented our participants with these rumors, we asked them 2 questions. Do you think the story is true? And would you perhaps share the story on a social media platform? And what we see across the studies that we have done is that people who are high in need for cares are more likely to believe that these rumors are true, and are also more likely to share these rumors, or being willing to share these rumors. And this happens no matter whether the rumors focus on the Republicans or the Democrats. So the question is, why do these people share these rumors? And in a particular study, we first asked whether they would be willing to share these rumors, and then subsequently we asked, well, why did you pick that rumor to share? And we gave them 4 different possibilities. One was that they believed it was true, that essentially they share this rumor because they believe in it. We also asked them, well, even if you are not sure it's true, do you believe that it would be have very important consequences if it were true? So essentially this sort of big if true kind of motivation. But we also asked, do you do this because you think this will mobilize people against a group you do not like? Essentially testing or going to the central aspect of our argument that people do this in order to mobilize. And then finally we asked, do you do this because you think it's fun, that people will be amused by seeing these rumors? And what we see is that that the relationship between being high in need for cares and giving these different reasons is that people who are high in need for cares, they are less likely to share rumors because they think they are true. They are more likely to do so because they think it will mobilize against groups they do not like. And at the same time, they think that that will be kind of funny to do. So the question then is, well, who is it that they're mobilizing against? So normally, if we think about populists and so on, and research on populism, there's often a differentiation between the political elites and the normal people. And for example, populists, they often see a conflict between the elite and people and side with people against the elite. What seems to be happening with these people who are high in need for cares is slightly different. So in a series of studies, we asked whether people, how participants felt about Republican elites, Democratic elites, Democratic voters, and Republican voters. And without going into the details of these plots, what essentially we found was that independently of whether you as a person identify as Democrat or Republican, then if you're high need for cares, then you hate elites from both political parties. You both express a dislike of Republican elites, and you dislike a lack of liking for Democratic elites. But we are also seeing that these individuals, they do not sympathize with voters either. They also report that they dislike other Republican voters or other Democratic voters. So essentially, these care seekers, they're not populists who side with the people against the elite. Essentially, individuals high in need for cares, they loathe everyone. And the question is, why hate everyone? Why even hate people that you actually claim to identify with? So here we looked at 2 different sort of psychological scales. One scale is a scale of party identification, how likely you are to identify, or how strongly you identify with the party that you consider yourself a member of. But we also looked at a scale that we constructed called party abandonment, that essentially that you feel left and abandoned by other people from your political party. And what we found was that people high in need for chaos, they do identify with these political parties. They have a stronger identification with them than the average voter. But at the same time, they feel that the other members of political parties have sort of left them behind. So who are these individuals? So what we have just seen is that the need for chaos is connected to feelings of abandonment. And we also know from the theoretical literature that the need for chaos is likely this sort of extreme dominance strategy where you're trying to target the entire hierarchy rather than single actors. So in order to feel this need for chaos, you really need to be motivated by dominance. So what we suggested was that essentially the people who need for chaos are the people who are both high in status seeking, who really craves dominance, and at the same time feel abandoned, who feel like they have a low actual status. And we have been looking at this in a number of studies where we can see indeed people who feel high in need for chaos, they feel more lonely, they feel that they have a lower placement on this on sort of society's ladder, but at the same time they're also very high in psychological traits that relates to dominance and status seeking. So they are high in status seeking, but they feel they don't have the status that they deserve. And need for chaos especially seem to sort of go to the ceiling when these two things intersect. So when you have people who are very high in status seeking and at the same time feel low in their actual status, either low on the societal ladder or low in loneliness. So this reminds us of another Hollywood movie, or Hollywood series, namely Game of Thrones, where one of the main characters, Lord Baelish, says that, well, chaos is not a pit. Chaos is a ladder. Essentially, that you can use chaos to climb the social hierarchy. And this is to be specifically what is happening or what is the motivating goal for these individuals. So what is it that they want? Normally, when we look at more radicalized groups, they have some type of utopian ideological vision. But that doesn't really seem to be the case for these chaos seekers. In one studies, we asked about, well, what is it actually that they dream of? So do they dream of a world where everyone, or just people like me, are showed respect? So are the ideal world one where everyone is treated well, or just one where they're treated well? And what we can see is that people high in need for chaos, they are actually less likely to dream of a world where everyone is showed respect, but they're more likely to dream of a world where they themselves and only them are shown respect. But the key thing is actually that they feel meaninglessness. So that they have this sense that no matter how hard they try in life, it doesn't make any difference. And this sentiment is extremely highly correlated with the need for chaos. So in that sense, the way we should think about this chaotic sentiments is that it's a nihilistic strategy of last resort. It is when you feel stuck in your current place, then you're trying to burn it all down as the last attempt to gain some status in a society that feel you have left you behind. And again, this is reminiscent of a central actor in Hollywood movies. This time, the Joker from Batman, and especially the Joker from the Batman movie, The Dark Knight. In one central scene in The Dark Knight, Alfred, the Batman's butler, describes the motivation of the Joker in a way that really seems to hit central to the way that people high in need for chaos feels. So when he describes the Joker, he says, well, some men aren't looking for anything logical. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. some men just want to watch the world burn. So why do people share hostile political rumors? We argue that a lot of sharing reflects this need for chaos. It's driven by status-obsessed yet deeply marginalized individuals who seek to mobilize against the entire established cosmos. And against fact-checking assumptions, these individuals do not care about the truth. And against the assumption that trolls just want to have fun, what they do should definitely be considered a form of political activism, but a form of political activism that is focused on making the world a better place just for themselves, not for everyone else. So the implications of this is that we talk an awful lot about misinformation and conspiracy theories and so on. But in reality, when it comes to modern democracies, the spread of hostile political rumors is actually not the real problem. The spread of hostile political rumors is an epiphenomenon. It's a symptom of something that's much worse, namely that we have extreme feelings of marginalization within modern democracies, and that these feelings of marginalization activates an evolved super destructive strategies to remedy these feelings. And in order to remove these feelings, policymakers need to deal with the first point. It's not enough to remove misinformation from Facebook or other social media platforms. Essentially, we need to deal with increasing inequality. We need to deal with feelings of loneliness and marginalization. And of course, the problem is that that's probably way more difficult and requires way more responsibility and way more work on behalf of politicians than just blaming social media for the spread of misinformation. And with that, I want to say thank you to you for listening, and also to my co-authors on this work and the foundations who have funded it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I'll stop sharing.
Thank you again, Professor Petersen. Definitely a very enlightening work, a study that speaks tons of what's been going on in your specific field of study, which is, of course, the situation in the United States, but also makes at least me think, and I'm sure many of our colleagues over here as well, of situations happening in many other countries and in the world itself. And while we wait for our colleagues to share their comments and of course come up with questions, I want to ask you a question and start a conversation, Dr. Petersen, following, of course, the brilliant presentation of your work. If you consider, even empirically, of course, because you haven't studied this, but that we can extrapolate what you have found in your study to what's going on nowadays at the international level. Many of the key words that you use in the study, from chaos seekers to burn it all to go against the establishment, really resonates when I look at the international, the rules-based system that we as countries and nations created after World War II. There's plenty of voices coming from many different parts of the world and from many different backgrounds that actually behave in the way that you just have described. And their aim actually seems to be to have a chaotic world, a world in which anarchy rules, a world in which the United Nations is no longer relevant because it's seen as the establishment itself. It's seen as the government, the global government, that in a way has marginalized so many people. So I just wanted for you, Professor Petersen, to share your thoughts on how your study enlighten us a bit about what's going on today in the world.
No, that's a very good point, and I completely agree with your analysis. And you can say that the international system is sort of traditionally conceived as a system of anarchy, and in such a system, you do need dominance. You need to be feared in order to not be attacked. That's at least the sort of classical lessons in international politics. But then, since the Second World War, we have slowly built a more rule-governed international system organized around United Nations. But what has happened in that process is that some countries have less to say than they would like. And as a consequence, they're right now then trying to break down that rule-based system and again replace it with a more anarchic world where again dominance is a main asset. And of course, that's something that for sure terrifies me because today we are in a very different situation than we were before the Second World War, because now dominance displays involves nuclear weapons, which with a very far-reaching destructive potential.
Thank you, Professor Petersen. And definitely, when we talk nukes, we always talk about major issues. I have a question from Alejandra Lopez de Alba, specifically dealing with the correlation between status seeking and deprivation. She kindly asked if you could elaborate a bit more about the relationship between that status seeking and deprivation, whether it's just relative perceived or it's a real connection there, and to which types of activism will this lead to, and whether there are different outcomes or different aspects of deprivation, if it's perceived or real.
That's also a very, very good question, and it's something that we've been thinking a lot about, and something that we also have done research on. So I think it's important to say that it's what happens in modern democracies as inequality is rising is not necessarily that we only have a conflict between those who are worst off and those who are best off. What happens when you increase inequality in a society or in any social group for that matter is that you have more intense status competition at every step of the societal ladder. So you have those who are sort of worst off. They are competing with those who are just above them in the hierarchy, in the same way that those who are who are sort of the second tier at the elite level, they're not competing with those who are worst off. No, they're competing with those who are at the top. So you have intensified status competition at all levels of society, and that's essentially what makes unequal societies so much more unstable. This also means that you can have chaos seekers at every level of those societal steps, even if these people are not sort of objectively speaking deprived. So in that sense, it is very much relative deprivation that matters. And I think one good example of this is Donald Trump in the United States, who are essentially using or used and still is using aspects of the strategies that I've described here to go from being a second-tier elite to become the most powerful man in the United States. And he does so by then trying to mobilize people more broadly in society. But while relative deprivation does play a key role, it should also be said that actual deprivation, of course, also matters a lot. What we have been looking at in the United States is how race influences the need for chaos, and there we can see that white men and black men, they both have higher than average levels of need for chaos, but they have it for different reasons. So when we look deeper into the sources of the need for chaos in black men, then it's very much sort of historical injustices that drive this. Whereas if it's white men, then it's very much the sense of losing already established status that is the main driver of their need for chaos. So in that sense, if we look at black men where there has been historical injustices and say absolute deprivation, then it does matter. But at the core of the need for chaos, I think, is the perceived deprivation, also because it is really fueled by these personality traits that make people crave status. So it's this sense of not having the status that you deserve.
And this perceived deprivation, Dr. Petersen, is more present than ever. Hearing you during the presentation, we understood you were referring to the electoral cycle that precedes the current one, but it could pretty much be descriptive of what we're witnessing. What are your takes on the impact that this electoral cycle happening in the United States as we speak will have on the American democracy? And what are your observations, considering, of course, your field of study, of how this burn it all and chaos seekers indicators are moving during this month and leading up to November?
Yeah, so I was asked some of a question like this in the context of the last U.S. presidential election, and there what I described there, and especially I was asked about my concerns for the eruption of political violence, and there I said, well, I do think that there's a potential for political violence. But the way to think about the onset of political violence is just in the same way as earthquakes, that you can sort of measure the building tensions, but it's extremely difficult to predict exactly when things will erupt. And we did then see that it suddenly did erupt with at a larger scale with the storm on U.S. Congress. But in a way, I think that event perhaps makes it a bit more likely to predict what will happen, or at least the following scenario is what I'm concerned about, which is that activists or supporters of Donald Trump, like the extreme supporters of Donald Trump, the radicalized groups among those supporters, they will learn from the last election that you cannot wait with engagement in violence, that you need to do it as the election occurs in order to harvest the benefits, because in a way things happened too late to actually make a difference the last time. So what I fear is that we'll be seeing something which, for lack of a better word, you can sort of call African style electoral violence, what we see in some of the African states that are more unstable, where you are seeing threats of violence and violence happening just before or just during the actual election in order to intimidate opponents. And I don't think we will see this at a very large scale, but I think we will see, or I fear at least that we'll see some of it. The only thing that sort of pulls the other way is that is the extent to which the most radicalized individuals and group leaders are now in prison because of the storm on Congress, because quite a few individuals have been imprisoned following the storm on Congress. But otherwise, I do think that we will see some form of electoral violence in the United States. Again, not large scale, but eruptions of it here and there.
Well, as long as during our next meeting in a few months' time, and maybe in your next presentation, you do not incorporate a reference to the movie Civil War to explain what's going on in the U.S., I think we'll be okay. But thank you. It's a very enlightening vision of how things might come up later this year on the north side of our border. I have a couple of other questions from other audience. And one of them refers to whether socioeconomic interventions are enough to deactivate the triggers that these individuals have. At the end of your explanation, you were looking at how we need to address as democracies this dissatisfaction that's felt. Whether an action, this question tries to see whether that action from the government will be enough, or is it safe to assume that taking care of these social political aspects will keep the psychological threats in check, or whether these need to be done along with a more specific intervention that includes a psychological intervention, perhaps.
So that's a very important question, and I think we need to differentiate between individuals who are already radicalized, and then look at the engine that sort of furthers radicalization in not yet radicalized individuals. And when it comes to already radicalized individuals, then I do think that we need to engage in the kinds of de-radicalization programs that have been successful around the world. And I think one of the interesting things about those kinds of de-radicalization programs is that essentially what the successful ones do is that they try to remove feelings of marginalization. That they signal that, okay, you are you can become a member of society again. You can get a good footing in society again, and it's not really about the beliefs, the ideological beliefs of the radicalized individuals. Like those don't really matter in the same way as I'm arguing that people who share conspiracy theories and misinformation, they don't really do it because they think that they are true, which also means that the way to get them back into society is not through sort of logical argumentation, because it's not really, that's not the important thing. The important thing, that the underlying cause is the feelings of marginalization. So I think psychological interventions are needed towards those individuals, but if we look at decreasing the long-term risk of radicalizing individuals, then I think that socioeconomic interventions and policies are the way to go. I think that's the only tool that we have available, and here I'm leaning very much on the work by Petersen, he's a Russian mathematician, but sort of applying, based in the United States, but applying mathematics to try to describe long-term history of instability. And one of the things that he's finding again and again and again is that it is really the socioeconomic factors in society, the degree of inequality that precedes all major eruptions of political instability, whether it's the fall of the Roman Empire, or whether it's the civil war in the United States, or the current situation that we have in the United States. So I think giving people better lives simply reduces the risk of radicalization and instability quite a bit. But while saying these things, then of course these are something that will help in the long term, and I don't mean to take social media companies completely off the hook, because I think what social media offers is a toolbox for these radicalized individuals, which makes it much easier for them to coordinate and get together and says, this is what we'll do now, and this is how we'll do it. So without social media, I'm not sure we would have had a storm on the US Congress, even if I don't think that it was social media that was the ultimate cause of it, but it just made it much more easy to actually go through with these plans. So I do think we also need to look at how to better regulate social media and how to defacilitate the spreading of at least illegal speech online.
Yeah, definitely. The role social media in general and in technology companies is something that we need to delve into, and more so now that we're entering the era of artificial intelligence. Dr. Petersen, we have one more question from Montserrat Cabral, and with this, I also ask everyone that had joined us to if they have still something they want to comment on another question, just send it over, because we're approaching the end of this marvelous conversation. Professor Petersen, Montserrat Cabral asks whether rumor sharing or the so-called cancel culture that is so prevalent nowadays, whether we can consider this a real threat to politicians, or whether they are actually a tool for some of them.
I do think I think this is a very good question, and I do think it's a tool for politicians, and at least I think when it comes to misinformation, then the people we should be focusing most on is our politicians rather than random people on the internet, because the most impactful misinformation comes from the top. Like these are the ones who can push narratives that will persuade and reach a much larger audience, and I think we have seen that politicians in many countries they are willing to bend the truth and sometimes lie directly, and one of the concerning developments in recent times related to the emergence of the need for chaos is that sometimes some voter groups actually reward politicians for suspending with the truth, not despite the fact that they are suspending with the truth, but because they're doing so. And I think one example of that is, again, Donald Trump, who I don't know whether you can remember this, the picture that was shared from his inauguration back in 2017, and he said, well, there were more people at my inauguration than at Barack Obama's inauguration, and anyone with eyes could see that was not true, but still he insisted that was true. And again, coming back to the idea of dominance, like anyone can sort of say something that might be true, but it's only the truly dominant who care so little about social norms that they will blatantly lie where everyone knows that they're lying. So that's a really, really clear signal of dominance. And the individuals who have this sort of chaotic mindset, what they want is a dominant leader. So in that sense, sometimes lying can be a benefit to you because it signals something important about your personality, namely that you are a dominant individual, and that is attractive to individuals who want conflict, who wants chaos.
Yeah, most unfortunately, this case is not only seen in the United States, but in many other countries. I am afraid to say. And with that, thank you again, Dr. Petersen. It's of course a note that's not on the most positive sense, but as you said at the beginning, we are not here to look at how positive things are, but maybe to raise awareness about where we need to look into and what we need to be aware of to actually start working in a more positive environment, maybe at all levels. So it was again a very enlightening, a very interesting and engaging conversation. We thank you on behalf of the Mexican Council on Foreign Affairs for accepting this invitation and for being with us this afternoon for you, morning for us. And we'll look forward to continue talking in the months and years to come. Thank you again, Dr. Petersen.
Thank you so much, both for the invitation and all the important questions. Thank you.